Good day, everyone, and thank you all for joining the webinar with us. I am Michael, the moderator for this webinar. I welcome everyone for today's webinar, which is CMS CAH Swing Bed Requirements and Changes 2023. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our presenter for today, Laura A. Dixon. Laura A. Dixon, BS JDRN, CPHRM, was the Director of Facility Patient Safety and Risk Management and operations for COPIC from 2014 to 2020. Ms. Dixon has over 20 years of clinical experience in acute care facilities, including critical care, coronary care, perioperative services, and pain management. I would now like to hand over the floor to the speaker. Over to you, Laura.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael, for that very nice introduction, and welcome everyone to the program for today. As Michael mentioned, we're talking about swing beds, and in particular with critical access hospitals. What we're going to be talking about. First, though, I want to talk about the conditions. Overall, there were 4 changes made back in November 2019. This is what they cumulatively call the Hospital Improvement Rule. Overall, as of July 2023, there are roughly 1,360 critical access hospitals in the United States. Almost all of them provide swing bed service. So let's start with the 4 swing bed changes. First off, dental services. Before, you had to help residents get routine and 24-hour emergency dental care. Next one for swing beds happened to be the activity program. Before, you had to have an ongoing program to support what the patient wanted to do in their choice of activities. And this was, of course, based upon their assessment and care plan. Third major change, it dealt with the social worker. And this one made no sense with the original law. Before, if you had 120 beds or more, full-time social worker. Last major change happened to be with that resident who did perform service. The patient could choose or refuse to perform, and that still remains the same on what a surveyor would do when they come into your site to look and assess your swing bed area. It is a worksheet called Exhibit 288. All right, some resources for you as critical access hospitals overall. The Medicare Learning Network, MLM, they have a fact sheet that just talk about swing beds. As far as the critical access hospital booklet itself, there is a 14-page one, additional information on payments, grants that you can access and tap into. CMS even has a website dedicated to critical access hospitals. So I want to start off talking about surveyor training in particular. And the reason I bring this up is because initially when CMS years and years ago started sending out, they weren't doing very good training on some of their surveys. Well, they recognized that's a detriment to not only the whole process, but to you as a hospital. So now they are requiring training for all of their surveyors. Deficiencies. These are the citations, deficiencies, however you wish to call them. I mentioned that we can now access them. It separates it by tag numbers. They update it quarterly. Now, some of this information is only available from October 2018. As far as the swing bed deficiencies identified here, not informing residents, that's how they call them, residents of rights. Restraints was a big one. They applied them without an order. They didn't follow their own policy. Staff unaware there were specific rights for swing bed patients. I want to talk about hospitals in Appendix A. Now, the basic requirement to qualify for swing bed provision, Medicare patients, and I want to stress Medicare patients, must have a 3-day inpatient qualifying stay. Some changes that they did clarify: you have to provide culturally competent and trauma-informed care. The majority of the content has to do with patient rights. Here's the information that you need to provide, just an example of it. So let's start off with what you as the facility need to do. So first off, you have to be certified by CMS to provide skilled nursing care. That's what you have to do. So essentially what we're doing is the patient's being discharged from acute care and going to a skilled bed. So what do you have to have? You have to have orders that we discharge them from acute care to swing bed. There has to be a 3-day qualifying stay under Medicare. There is no length of stay restriction for a swing bed. There is for acute. Next requirement is your eligibility. If the resident is determined to be incompetent, well, usually any place, the representative steps in their shoes and they act on their behalf. Other rights that the patient need to know. I already mentioned they can perform services, and these are services on behalf of you. Other rights. I already mentioned keeping eye contact when we're talking to them. Otherwise, planning, implementing the care, they have a right to be informed of what's going on, participate. As far as admission, transfer, discharges, they're talking a transfer outside the facility. There are restrictions on transferring and discharging a patient. You cannot transfer when there is an appeal pending, unless, of course, it's an endangerment issue. So when you do this, there is certain medical record documentation that must be done. Information you need to send over is contact information of who took care of them, who was their doctor at your facility. As far as the patient, before we transfer them, we have to give notice before that occurs, at least 30 days. As far as the content, we also have to include what's the statement of rights. Otherwise, if you close or you want to do a room change, same thing. You have to give them advance notice if your facility is closing, preferably not with 24 hours before it happens. As far as transfer and discharge now, under Appendix PP, you can't transfer or discharge unless you have to do it for the resident's welfare. Patients have a right to be free from abuse and neglect. So from those chemical and physical restraints, again, we cannot use it for convenience. As far as reporting abuse, I mentioned at the beginning, there are time limits. So here are the timelines that I had talked about. Timely, of course. No later than 24 hours after an allegation is made. Have evidence that you did your due diligence. Otherwise, freedom from abuse and neglect, not have their property mistaken. Again, I talked about negative attitude. That's a form of abuse. All right, back to Appendix W, social services. Patient activities, they took those out. Social services, they deleted those. You have to do an assessment, a comprehensive assessment. You have to do a care plan and discharge planning. And for these next couple of slides, these are still things you do have to assess. What's their dental and nutritional status? Do they have teeth or do they have dentures? And discharge planning, that is still part of the assessment. There is a time frame that's listed in the long-term care manual. There are specialized services, the PASAR, for those for mental illness or developmentally. So what does the care plan have to include? The Critical Access Hospital Tag 1620 talk about an interdisciplinary team. We have to consult with the resident about what they want. What are your goals for when you're here in swing bed? So again, the development of comprehensive care plan, measurable objectives and timeframes to meet those needs. The baseline care plan within 48 hours of admission. I want to talk on the trauma patient because this may occur in swing beds quite a bit. So those who are trauma survivors have to receive trauma-informed care in accordance to those standards of practice. So it talks about in there treatment services for the mental or social, psychosocial concerns. You have to make reasonable attempts to provide these services. We have to include the resident and representative in that treatment and plan of care. And of course, yes, there has to be a discharge summary. And then finally, rehab services before I get to dietary. This is physical, that include that in the plan of care. Dental services, normally just part of their routine care. Then nutrition. They talk about assisted nutrition and hydration. These are just some of them. This happens to be listed on this particular, I think this is slide 163. So Michael, thank you for this opportunity, and I want to thank all the attendees. So thank you very much.
Once again, thank you, Laura, for the great session, and hope it was an informative for all of us. So that does conclude the session for today. Thank you everyone for participating. You may all disconnect now. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.